My name is Michael Eggerling. I lead the marketing team here at Trustero, and I'm joined by two of my favorite colleagues, George Totev, who is our Chief Information Security Officer at Trustero, and Nick Martin, who is our Vice President of Product. And we're here to talk to you about a concept and a topic that we think is really interesting. And so it is this concept of really why we exist, why Trustero exists as a company, and this idea that GRC is broken. It's breaking and it's broken. And we believe that AI can fix it. And it's really this introduction of what we call AI for GRC, not necessarily AI in GRC or GRC people using AI to make their jobs different or better, but AI for GRC. And Nick and George are going to go into depth about what that is and how it's different later on in this session. But I really just kind of want to introduce that and talk about it a little bit up front. So with that said, George, we have a problem in GRC. Why don't you start by explaining to us what that problem is?
Yeah, we've been thinking about that, and there is a lot of happening in the business and outside of GRC in the last 20, 30 years, and GRC is kind of not catching up. So if you think about the landscape, there is a regulatory proliferation. If you think about, we had GDPR, then we had the EU AI Act, we had the DORA. At the same time, new standards are coming online. So there is a lot of regulatory activity. And then at the same time, the business is becoming more and more complex. It's becoming international, it's expanding to multiple countries, multiple divisions, multiple product lines. And that brings a technology complexity because we're using not a single cloud now. We have several cloud providers. We have a hybrid cloud, and then put AI on top of that. And in the GRC space, we just cannot scale with the rest of the organization. And that is the major challenge because we know what needs to happen. We just need more resources. The risks start to spiral, and we see this strange phenomena of like a shadow risk acceptance. In other words, there are areas where you just don't even look at because you don't have enough resources, or you look at them, you know what is the risk, you know how to manage it, but you don't have enough resources to manage it accordingly. So you start accepting risk. The GRC team start to accept risk on behalf of them. Now we're even more scared by the shadow AI because with the shadow AI, not only they can get a SaaS solution, they can develop an app. So these citizen developers are becoming a thing, where you can use AI to create some kind of agentic application that assumes your identity and it starts doing stuff for you, and then the security team doesn't even know about what is going on. So on one hand, we have this big change of regulatory proliferation, business complexity, which brings technology complexity. We cannot scale to manage this, but at the same time, we have the shadow risk acceptance and the shadow AI. So the case we're making is that the way we're doing business in the GRC team now, it's not just going to scale to manage the increasing requirements for us. Okay, so the case that we're making is that AI will come to the rescue. We're not saying that AI is going to replace how we're doing GRC. It's just going to help us. And if you move to the next page, Michael. And this is something that Nick and I have been discussing quite some time. We already talked about what are the complexity. And the problem is not that we don't know what the solution is. The problem is that we don't have resources. So we cannot scale with a company. I cannot go to my CFO and say, hey, give me another 3 people to do continuous control monitoring. That is not going to happen. So we have to find a smart way to scale. And the case that we're making is that if you use AI, it will give you this quantitative push forward. You'll be able to offload tasks that are mundane, that are repetitive, but still need to be done. So you can offload that to AI, so you can focus on more strategic thinking, and that will give you the qualitative lead that we also need to have within the GRC space. Nick, do you want to add something to it?
Yeah, sure. I think a couple of the bullet points here further down, really highlight what a challenge it is. Most companies may aspire to do something like a continuous compliance, but for most of them, it's not real or even realistic. And then, traditional automation has kind of hit its ceiling. There's certain things that traditional automation can't solve, and that's where you really need to get to something that leverages AI.
Yeah, and so leveraging AI can give you a lot of additional benefits. So now we can start talking about control assurance, the entire life cycle of the controls, because now we have the resources to do it, right? And that will give you other use cases, like, for example, checking for the gaps between what you currently have and where you want to be, and start analyzing those gaps.
Yeah, George, it actually struck me when we were at the Gartner conference together last week in Washington, D.C., how many people we talked to about control assurance and continuous control monitoring, and how everybody would nod along and say, yep, that sounds good. They can't do it because it just is not a realistic thing for most companies because of the people power it would take to get something like that done. And how I think you said it best. You say something like, this is the desired state. This is the thing that everybody wants, but it just is not something that is accessible.
Yeah, continuous control monitoring is an interesting case because there is a consensus within the community that this is one of the best ways to manage risk. Like, you know what the risk is, you design your controls, it's just making sure that those controls operate as designed. And it's been proven because in cases like, for example, FedRAMP or the DoD, or in other kind of a high risk areas where you can afford to throw more resources, it actually works. We know it works. And let's be frank, it's not rocket science. It's a simple thing that everybody knows. The challenge is that we don't have resources to do it. With using AI, we kind of democratize it so everybody can start doing continuous control monitoring.
So Nick, this is something that you developed, and when you tell us a little bit about, as we start to go from, why AI for GRC and why GRC is such a good fit to be disrupted and helped out by artificial intelligence that's purpose built for it. Why don't you tell us what AI for GRC is? Kind of this cryptic thing that we've been talking about. What are your requirements for something to be AI for GRC, to be purpose built?
Yeah, great. So this is meant to contrast standalone AI solutions, your typical large language model, chatbot, and then also stand apart from traditional GRC platforms. You can kind of think of this as a best of both worlds sort of scenario. You have a system that's embedded in key GRC workflows, so it's very knowledgeable of the things that GRC professionals need to accomplish. It's purpose built for those workflows. It's intelligent and not just automated. And we'll get into that in a little bit. There's a lot that can be done with automation, but it tends to be brittle. If there are very well specified things that need to be evaluated, take technical controls, for example, checking whether something's encrypted. That is the type of thing that can be automated. But GRC tends to be messier, have fuzzier boundaries, and it actually works with human language typically, and not with traditional automation. So you need something that can evaluate human language and human documents. Grounded in real operational data, this means that in order to get to that nirvana state where you're actually doing continuous control monitoring, that's only as good as the data that's being evaluated. So you want to actually be able to look at the real data for the operations to prove whether things are operating effectively. And that's in contrast to having things that are proxies for operationalization. I'm sure many folks on this call will be familiar with the pattern of checking a box. Yes, I say this is working. Well, that's a lot different than actually showing it's working. And so that's what we mean by grounded in real operational data. You need the data to be able to evaluate it. And then the final one is super important for trust and confidence in the solution. It's got to be transparent and accurate. So what you don't want to have is kind of an AI oracle where it makes pronouncements and then you just have to take its word for it. You just have to believe it. Instead, what you want is something that lives up to the same standards that a GRC professional would have to meet around showing their work, citing sources, citing evidence, that type of thing. So it's not just give me the answer, but also show me why. So that's how we're thinking about what this category of AI for GRC means. It really has to meet all of these criteria and not just one or two of them.
And if anybody's wondering, I think we are going to show some of these things later in this presentation that Nick and the team have been working on that meet these criteria.
Yeah. So let's do then a click down on data. Different operations are possible depending on the availability and quality of data. So if you don't have the data, then you can't actually make a proper determination. And so what can be challenging about this journey, which is our achieve and maintain compliance journey, pretty standard journey that folks are familiar with for framework or regulatory compliance, where they're going to start by scoping, performing a risk assessment, doing design and design assessment, so on and so forth, all the way through operating effectiveness and ultimately, control assurance. You need a lot of data. And again, this is not checking boxes. This is actual, well thought out information that comes from a variety of sources, may involve a number of different roles. And so there's a lot of data orchestration that's required. But once the data is present, then the AI can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you if you can get it in the right place, right time, and right level of quality.
So this is kind of interesting. Yeah, if you go back to the previous slide, it's an interesting aspect, kind of the result of this proliferation of regulatory requirements and business complexity. The workflow, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this workflow. We're using it all the time. The challenge that we start seeing is that in order to execute that workflow, you need access to a lot of data. It's just not humanly possible to have everything. I'm always saying that nobody knows everything about their organization, but now it's becoming a challenge that even if you have a team, getting access to that data, knowing where it is, what is the content of that data, and collecting it together in order to be able to execute that workflow is becoming a problem.
Okay, so let's keep moving and let's talk about some practical use cases. Let's take this from X's and Y's to real life. And so I think, Nick, we're going to start up at the macro level and then zero in on some real life use cases, right?
Yeah, so this is just meant to convey here the kind of the GRC landscape and all of the opportunity. And we see opportunity throughout all of these different journeys that are in GRC. And today we're going to focus in on a couple of these that achieve and maintain compliance and then answering questionnaires. So something under compliance and then a little bit under customer trust as well.
Okay, and then we're going to zoom in. So now we're zooming in. So we're zooming in here on, you can't see my mouse. There it is. We're zooming in now on achieve and maintain compliance. As you can see how complicated these get. There's so many opportunities to do things with artificial intelligence. And so now we're looking at that workflow, that journey here. And so here are some of the, Nick, why don't you explain some of the, you made this chart and then I tinkered with it. Why don't you explain what we're looking at?
Yeah, sure. So this is the same journey that we showed before with that kind of the data view. And now we're looking at it with a click down into a couple of the areas. So first area you'll see kind of on the left half of the slide is about design. And there's a lot that goes into the design of a compliance program. And we're going to specifically look into doing a framework policy design assessment. And it's answering this question here: do my policies satisfy a new framework or a given framework? And this is especially relevant as that kind of regulatory proliferation that George mentioned at the top is taking place. So one day, you've got your compliance program under control, and then the next it's, hey, guess what? Here's a new regulation. We need to meet it. And the first step is often figuring out, well, gosh, how close or how far away am I even at this current starting point? So that's what that framework policy design assessment step is about. And then we'll go into some other ones here as well in operating effectiveness. We'll show something that's can be kind of in the weeds, but it's essential in terms of showing your work around generating test tables for operating effectiveness. And then we'll also show off control assurance here at the end, which is that, again, that state that everybody wants to get to, where you're actually evaluating the operating effectiveness of your program, perhaps as often as every single day.
Yeah, so everything marked in the little green dot here is something that we're going to show here in a moment. So in a minute here, I'm going to hand off the reins to Nick, as we typically do on these things. And Nick's going to go into some demos, some live demos of Trustero, and show you how we handle some of these pieces. And so let's zoom in on the journey of a policy design assessment?
I'll just start really big picture. So what this is showing here is the steps involved in a policy design assessment. And the steps, regardless of how you do it, they're the same. And then it comes down to, well, what are the tactics or the tools that you're going to be using? And so we've got this laid out, and I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but the story is actually fairly simple. You've got a traditional workflow. You've got an LLM assisted workflow, so using a chatbot. And then you've got the AI for GRC journey. Like I mentioned, the steps are the same. So framework, the first thing you do in all these journeys is you're going to go track down the framework or regulations set of compliance or set of requirements rather. And that may actually be, the human way of doing it is you would actually start with the standard, and somebody has to laboriously look through that thing and turn that from, the standard or regulation to a series of questions. So human expert has to sit down and do that. Then you have to figure out, okay, which of my policies are in scope for this particular framework? That's more work. Then you need to check and see, and this can be really, really labor intensive. You take the requirements one question at a time. You got to figure out, okay, do I have a policy that covers this? And that's basically a lot of reading. Somebody's got to read a lot of documents and figure out where those particular questions are either satisfied, so you meet the requirement, or not satisfied. And then you need to track all this stuff, right? So you track your gaps, you maybe classify them as, this is a complete miss. Maybe we actually have a place in the policy that is in hard conflict with the regulation. And so you classify all that stuff, and then you propose some remediations. So, the misses might be fairly straightforward. It's, okay, we got to update this, that, or the other policy, add some new language to cover this new thing. If there's actually a conflict, then that might be a little bit trickier to resolve. Then you have to take that policy through whatever life cycle steps exist within the company. So, taking it to the right stakeholders and getting it approved and that whole thing. So that's the traditional workflow. And let's see, I think, yeah, there we go.
Hey, Nick, before we pull that away, I wanted to ask George a question too, before we show your screen.
Yeah.
So George, we've vetted this with you, and you're a CISO, and you've been a CISO, and you worked at a bunch of big places before you came and worked with us. And so we talked about this yesterday, and I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to talk about this process and the experience of doing it the traditional way, and what your mindset was when we were talking through this process, and the days that it takes, and where this thing can get hung up, and where it can get to be very long.
Yeah, this is interesting because this is a traditional process. I mean, everybody goes through this thing. We're all familiar with that. And there are almost like two dimensions to this. One is the speed, which this graph kind of portrays very nicely. It shows how much faster it is with using a specialized AI. But there is another dimension about the quality. And this is almost similar, like in a lot of cases, you hire consultants from the outside to help you with this thing, especially when we're talking about something more esoteric as a regulatory compliance that you're going after. You don't have that expertise on your team, and you're wondering how to build them, or you're wondering whether you want to keep them in-house or you want to bring an external one. But in general, you start with a consultant who understands the field. They come and they understand the field, but they have to learn about your organization. If you're using a traditional kind of a general AI, you're getting a general expert. Because on one hand, it doesn't have the context of your environment, which is something that you can probably do. You can upload your policies, your controls, some audit findings, whatever, like all necessary, you can upload to something like Notebook LM. The problem there is that you have to train it how the expert AI is doing. Not only the contextualizing is one aspect, the other one is how to use that information. The expert AI comes in. So it's almost like getting a general compliance specialist, a consultant, to move faster and also more accurate. So those two dimensions. One is how fast you go through it, but the other one is how accurate is the result. And there's some kind of unintended benefit that from this, because as Nick mentioned, the very last step is, okay, we know what are the gaps. How do we fix those gaps? And usually that involves quite a few teams outside of the GRC team, the broader security organization, or also legal, IT, development, sales. So all of them have to come together in order for you to have a plan how to address those gaps and make sure that you have the necessary resources to address those gaps. If you have an external consultant, very often the end of the engagement is, yep, there you go, those are your gaps, move on. Whereas if you have a in-house expert AI, you can open up that expert AI to the other teams, and then you have a much more effective collaboration when it comes to, okay, how do I close those gaps? In a way, I would say that figuring out what are the gaps is just the first step in the journey. And coming up with a plan how to address those gaps and implement that plan, I would say that more often this is the bigger problem than just the gap assessment.
Well said. Okay. Nick, let's get to the good stuff. Why don't you take over the screen and then show us what this looks like in AI for GRC or Trustero AI.
This is a demo account that just has SOC 2 in it. You can imagine they want to step up to doing a PCI. So they decide they need to handle payment cards, and they want to see how far away they are. And using our bulk Q&A feature, they can actually do that. One of the value adds that we provide at Trustero also is we actually have these curated requirement question sets. So this is something then it's one of those key steps in the design assessment that we've actually already done for you. And we've got examples here of places where the organization does meet a requirement and then some down below where it does not. And so you'll see what we've done here. It's actually fairly straightforward, but because of the amount of automation that's involved, this saves a tremendous amount of time. So we've got these questions, does the accounts control set include a control equivalent to PCI DSS, et cetera? And then it names the particular requirement. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to reply back with yes, in this case, we do cover it. And then here's why. And it actually includes links off to related information where you can see the details of how it came to its conclusion. So you don't have to take its word for it. It actually backs it up with information that's already in the platform. So leveraging the existing policy documents that are in the system. Then here's an example of one where it actually has concluded, no, you don't cover it. And again, it's explaining to you why. So it's going to tell you, it doesn't explicitly cover this. Here's an area where it's kind of close, but it doesn't exactly get there. And then again, it provides the link so that we can go in and inspect that policy ourselves and have a look at it and think that over. And just this process alone, so once it's armed with all the policy documents, and again, using a curated question set, this process is done in a matter of minutes. This would take a human being many, many, many hours to assess. And in fact, we've already helped some folks in scenarios where they have pretty demanding financial regulations they need to meet. And we were able to provide an assessment in a matter of hours that they estimated would take multiple FTE years actually to have conducted themselves. So while I describe this as sort of the bottom rung of the ladder in terms of our AI capabilities, this alone can already save a tremendous amount of time. And over time, this experience will just get richer and better.
Nick, one of the things that you mentioned to me before that sticks with me, this is one of the earliest things that we can do as far as the data journey, right? Like this is as far as nothing is easy, but things will get very easy with Trustero AI. But as far as the data that you need to achieve something, this is one of the easiest things that we can do.
Yeah, that's right. This has really good bang for the buck because essentially just provided a policy set, we can do this policy framework design assessment. And so that's really good. You don't have to bring in the controls, evidence, et cetera. You can get started right away with just that.
Great. Okay. So should we move on to the next use case?
Yeah, let's do it. The use case here is that a big part of proving operating effectiveness is actually comes down to evaluating tabular evidence. So this is an example here from a test account that we had configured. This is an identity and access management control. And you can see there the control objective says strong passwords and multi-factor authentication are implemented for accessing critical information systems to mitigate the risk of unauthorized access. Okay, so people have to have MFA. That's what that means. They have to have that second factor for authenticating. And critical for evaluating the operating effectiveness of a control is the test procedure. And you'll see here in this organization, they've got a test procedure for MFA status validation. It says validate that multi-factor authentication is enabled for at least 80% of users across all primary systems in scope. So 80% is actually, I think probably some of you are cringing. That's a very low bar, but it turns out to have been a convenient number for just doing a little demo for you all. So we want to get over 80. And crucially, I guess why a percentage is interesting is sometimes organizations, for a variety of reasons, have a hard time getting to 100%. So being able to actually have a test procedure that's written in natural language like this and is a percentage that is not 100% is pretty useful. So probably more realistic would be, 97% or 95%, something like that. So then let's take a look at the evidence. So we've got this demo evidence here, and you can see this is, GitHub user list. And so we've got all these users, and you can see over here in this column, we've got is MFA enabled? And it looks like it's not enabled for a couple of folks. So when we evaluate the operating effectiveness of the control, we're going to automatically produce this test table. And you'll see here, you get a name of the file that it's evaluated. So in this case, again, this is a demo. So it's just looking at a spreadsheet, but this could have been pulled automatically from GitHub using our integration there. And it's going to tell you right up front what happened. So it expected, and again, this was from the natural language that was there in the test procedure, it expected more than 80%. And this one just happened to come in at 77% because 2 out of these 9 did not have MFA enabled. And what it's going to do here is it's going to link to your source. So that's the piece of evidence we just saw. And then it's going to have this result column. And it'll actually explain to you what the result means. So in this case, the false value indicates that the user does not have MFA enabled. And you can see then it's highlighted those 2 failing rows. And so now we got to go figure out what's going on with Riley and Alex here and get their MFA turned on. So that's how test table can help out with operating effectiveness. And this is, I think, a really clear example of a couple of those criteria we mentioned up front about AI for GRC. It's not AI for GRC if it's not really deeply embedded in the journeys, and if it can't do things like this. This is what is meant by AI for GRC. And the number of steps involved in doing something like this, it is many, many, many steps and is really infeasible to do in a traditional kind of chatbot scenario. You really need something that's purpose-built for the job to do something like this and to do it, fast and transparently and all those kind of things.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Yeah. And this was obviously a serious build for the team and purpose built for GRC. And I mean, it looks like we're already getting some good compliments for it. So that's great. All right. So Nick, let's move on to the next one.
This is using Trustero Intelligence. This is our chat capability. This thing is incredible at pulling needles out of haystacks. So again, we're in this demo environment, this SOC 2 all passing. So it's loaded up with all kinds of evidence. And this is a scenario that some folks might find familiar. So let's say you've got a document, you don't even remember the title of it, you don't remember exactly when you even produced it, but it's a critical artifact as part of your compliance program. So we've asked the question here, do we have a document that covers disaster recovery testing we did within the last year? So pretty vague, kind of question, but not so uncommon. And it says, yes, indeed, you do have this. Annual data backup and restore test covers disaster recovery testing conducted on December 16th, 2024. The document outlines all this stuff you did. And sure enough, if I pop it open here, there it is, annual data backup and restore test. And it was done on December 16th. And it does cover all the things that TI said it covered. So that is a way, while you're in that compliance journey, of quickly being able to retrieve stuff that you might not even, might be a little foggy in terms of what that thing even is.
And Nick, if I can chime in here, this is one of my favorite features. especially in going through an audit. When you get the IRL list from the auditors asking for evidence, I almost copy paste from the list into the Trustero intelligence and say, find me this, find me that, and then give it to the auditors. It's one of my favorite features because otherwise, I mean, we, as any other organization, we have documents all over the place. We have evidence all over the place. And you cannot really do full text search. You just have to remember, try to organize them in different folders and all that stuff, which is, this organizes for you. It creates this abstraction layer over all the document sources, and you just ask, where is this, where is that, and it finds it with the link. So it's one of my favorite features.
It's great for control owners too, not just the compliance teams.
Yeah, that is actually a side quest because if you, so the power of distributed compliance, normally you have this concept of control ownership where different people within the organization own different controls. But sometimes that is artificial because you have a person outside of security team who owns the control and they have to execute it. And every time when they have to execute that control, they come and ask you exactly what am I supposed to do? Yes, you did it a quarter ago, you have to do it again, but how do I do it? What do you need from me? And instead of having this interaction with a person kind of occupying time of some of your experts, you just point them to the TI and they can ask the question, how did I do my user access review last time? Can you show me exactly the document that I submit? Why am I doing this thing? And you're getting this really powerful interaction with the system that gives you pointers and really procedure how to do something.
Okay, we're coming up towards the end of this thing, so let's keep moving. Nick, and what will you be sharing with us next?
Yeah, so this is using the same bulk question Q&A feature, this time to actually answer a security questionnaire. So CAIQ, a pretty standard questionnaire format that's out here. And this just shows off, again, how we're able to answer questions about a variety of subjects. So, you know, our audit and assurance policies, blah, blah, maintained, et cetera. And so you can get questions like this answered in a customer trust scenario as well. So let's say, you know, you're selling into an organization, their vendor management team wants you to answer some additional questions. That's exactly the sweet spot here for our Q&A tool. And so this is an example of a standard one, but it can answer any one-off questionnaire as well. So that's answering something over on that customer trust sort of branch of our landscape slide.
Nick, when you started sharing that, I was still sharing my screen, but we're looking at a CAIQ questionnaire that's 261 questions. Is that right?
Yeah.
Scroll up just a little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Okay. And I think we got one more, or are we done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is showing off our control assurance capability. So I mentioned we're back here in the SOC 2 demo account. This is showing off the end state that everybody wants to get to, which is all of your controls are passing and you're running it every single day. This is a super powerful capability that, you know, if you get to the point where all that data is coming in and it's at the right quality level, this is something you can achieve. And this takes something that is completely, you know, infeasible in many organizations and actually makes it quite tractable, quite straightforward, and then really helps prevent backsliding between audits, which is something that can be quite painful and unfortunately happens a fair amount of time.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't think we don't have time to go deep into this today, which we've done in multiple other webinars. So maybe I'll send out a link when I send the follow-up. If anybody's interested in seeing how Trustero AI handles control assurance, they can do that. Take a look at the other webinar. But why don't we move on to the last slide here, Nick, and you can tell us what you see in the future for AI for GRC.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I think the tagline there, from features to fluent conversation, really explains it. And we're developing our chat capability as a way to actually do intent-first interactions with the system. So you might actually not know how to use Trustero at all, but you could show up, ask a question, and get an answer, or even have it take action on your behalf. So being able to do things like ask, you know, what's the current status of our PCI DSS controls, or show me any gaps between our policies the NYDFS regulatory regime. And so that's the direction we're headed. Those of you who know a little bit about AI, the word agentic is probably coming up in lots of conversations, but that's basically the ability to treat the AI system as a colleague, as somebody who can actually take action, do things to accelerate you, and bring relief to these teams that have this massive scale problem. And so we see agentic, chat first, and then transparent interactions really being the future of AI for GRC. And so we're really excited about that. And that's the vision that we're building.
And when you say chat first, you go ahead, George.
Monotonous and repetitive work is that we lose knowledge. So no matter how much we document things, when somebody leaves, part of that tribal knowledge goes away. And then at the same time, when somebody new comes to the team, it takes about 6 months for them to be onboarded and to start becoming effective as a member of the team. Whereas with an expert AI like Trustero, all of the knowledge is already there. So you don't have the problem of periodically building up an expert and then losing part of the knowledge. Everything is here, it's available, and it's up to date because we have these receptors that are pulling information from the environment. So everything is up to date. When you ask a question today, the answer today may be different than the answer you got yesterday.